When I never felt that, come on, yeah. Never felt that, come on, yeah. When I never felt that, come on, yeah. You gotta get up.
Forms of Economic Organization, Chapter 24, Section 3. All right, I got the 7th graders working on this, so surely you can figure out traditional barter system, communism command system, capitalism private citizen controlled, and socialism is that mixed economy. Let's begin by taking a look at the characteristics of capitalism, otherwise known as the free enterprise system.
Such a thrill, but your love don't pay my bills. I need
Yeah, pretty basic. What are the characteristics? Well, number 1, private ownership. You can buy what you want and you have economic rights. They cannot take that away from you without due process. Eminent domain includes due process. You do not have capitalism if you do not have competition. You have to have freedom of choice. So if I don't want A, I can buy from B. This will not work if you have a monopoly or an oligopoly, which is just fun to say. Oligopoly. Individual initiative, entrepreneurs, those are the people that are willing to put forth their own capital and risk so you can get profit or loss. If we take a closer look at the United States, we have a mixed system. Private sector holds most of the property, but I don't think most people understand how much land, 30%, that the government owns. Essential, I'm making quotation marks with my fingers right now. Infrastructure, schools, roads, hospitals, regulate businesses to make sure that what you buy does what it says it's going to do and it's not going to kill you. Unless cigarettes, because, well, yeah. Patent restrictions. If I come up with a great idea, I make sure that you can't steal it for at least 7 years. All right, let's see what things are like in Sweden. Democratic socialism. So it is a democracy plus socialism. So here are our 2 categories. First, how much socialism does Sweden have? Well, you'll get free medical and dental care, tuition-free education all the way up through master's degree. New parents get an entire year off paid family leave, allowance to help pay for your child care, generous retirement benefits, low rent housing, unemployment payments, and ample vacation time. On the other side, capitalism, reform tax code, deregulation of industry, simplified tax code, lower corporate tax rate actually than the United States. So if we take a look at this chart, you can see the GDP, gosh, I hope you know what that is, and the potential GDP in Sweden and the US. And as if you take a look right there at 2008, boom, that is the Great Recession which affected the entire world. Down and then gradually working back up. You see the dotted lines that Sweden got back to the potential GDP faster than the United States did. Upon closer observation, you can see that they both suffered more or went down faster and recovered much faster as well. So one of the major differences are going to be healthcare between the United States and Sweden. You can see that we have the highest pointy triangle, which means we spend more on healthcare than any other industrialized nation per capita. And it's not just you and me spending. U.S. taxpayers foot much of the bill, even though we don't get subsidized healthcare. If you look at our red line, and that's what we're paying for in taxes, we are pretty much equal to the Netherlands and paying less than Norway, but everybody else, they're paying taxes and they're getting healthcare. We've kind of looked at this before. It compares us to other countries in areas where we're okay, in areas that we need work. If you really want to look at it, hit pause. Singapore, one of the freest, when we're talking about economic freedom, places in the world. Their focus is on economic freedom. Very few business regulations, very low tax rates, very few government services, no unemployment insurance. If you don't have a job for whatever purpose, you're on your own. Only the very, very poorest at the bottom are going to receive any benefits whatsoever. And then the dreaded socialism. Factors of production are owned by both the public and individuals. Okay, welfare for all. Government actively regulates the economy, controls the major industries and resources. A recent example of that your book gives you that did not work out very well would be Venezuela. They controlled several industries, especially the oil industry, because that's where the money comes from. Anytime you pull into a Citgo gas station, you are buying petroleum from Venezuela. Subsidizing food, housing, healthcare, education. They gave away free oil to other countries to gain favor, including the United States, just to make us look bad. And as long as the price of oil was high, everything in Venezuela was great. Nationalized it, little or no compensation, that whole neo-colonialism. So it was BP, British Petroleum, and American companies. It's like, that'll be our oil. Then the price of oil plummeted and they stopped making everything because they could just buy it from somebody else. But now that they can't buy it from somebody else.
You probably noticed that filling up your car with gas is a lot cheaper than it was a few months ago. That's because the price of oil has fallen. And while that's great for the consumer, for countries like Iran, Russia, and Venezuela, whose economies rely heavily on oil exports, it spells disaster. Reports suggest that Venezuela has been hit particularly hard by the oil price drop. But why? And what is the country doing to help solve the problem? Well, with one of the largest oil reserves in the world, Venezuela relies heavily on oil exports. In fact, oil generates around 95% of its hard currency income. So as oil prices have dropped by over half since June, the Venezuelan economy has really suffered, the results of which can be seen in the lives of the Venezuelan people. The country relies heavily on imports for food and other necessities. It's reported that long lines at state-run grocery stores are now the norm, as food supplies are extremely limited. Venezuelans are being pushed to the limit, and the army has even been called in to patrol food queues and keep order. Medical supplies are also a rare commodity in Venezuela. Unfortunately, Venezuelans have been in this position before. Prior to oil prices falling, the country had been in a deep recession with out-of-control inflation. Food and medical supplies have been in short supply for years, and economists are placing the blame on Venezuelan President Maduro and his unsustainable policies. Currently, the government funds free healthcare, state education, food, and gas subsidies. Venezuela also provides oil to 13 other countries within the Caribbean basin for what many experts argue are giveaway prices. Until now, Maduro has been reluctant to make changes to these costly policies as he strives to continue former President Hugo Chávez's popular socialist ambitions for Venezuela. So with people on the verge of starvation, just what is President Maduro doing about the situation? Well, in January 2015, Maduro went on a tour of China, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Algeria, and Russia in a bid to secure some financial aid for Venezuela. Experts argue that it was a desperate move, but Maduro did manage to secure a $20 billion investment deal with China and significant financing from Qatari banks. But critics argue that the money still isn't enough to provide the economic relief that Venezuela desperately needs. With the situation showing no signs of improving, widespread protests have broken out across the country, but these demonstrations have only been met with threats of violence from the government in order to keep public order. There's no doubt that tensions between the state and its citizens have reached a boiling point, and even Maduro has acknowledged rumors of the numerous coup plots.
Let's move on to Venezuela, a country you think about so little, you didn't even realize that's not Venezuela. This is Venezuela. Actually, that's not Venezuela either. This is Venezuela. Except it isn't, because Venezuela was the first one all along. But the fact you didn't notice is the point. Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro, has been going through a multitude of problems domestically, from food shortages to electricity rationing to massive inflation, and it all came to a head last week.
In Venezuela, a 54-year-old woman threw a mango at President Nicolas Maduro's head.
You can see the 54-year-old woman tossing a mango to Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, hitting him right in the head. The mango had a message written on it. "If you can, call me," the message said.
Well, this sounds like the premise of an adorable romantic comedy. I'd love to see Paul Rudd as the president, Sofia Vergara as the woman, and Paul Giamatti as the mango. It turns out, it's good casting. It turns out the woman desperately wanted an apartment, and the amazing thing is, it worked.
Maduro says his government will give Oliva what she asked for, an apartment.
You will get an apartment, and it will be given to you in the next few hours.
Wow. That is a fast government response and a pretty dangerous precedent for the president of Venezuela to set. Because now everyone knows if you want something, write it on a mango and throw it at his head. And unsurprisingly, that's exactly what's happened since.
Me llegó otro mango.
I received another mango, a ripe mango. Here it is. They wrote down the phone number. They gave me a mango today, just now. Mangoes are in. It's the time of the mango. You see, I have it here. Mangoes are welcomed, lovingly, but handed over gently. Don't throw them. Hand them over to me.
This is fantastic. The president of a country basically begging people to stop throwing mangoes at his head. And to the people of Venezuela, I say this. Keep doing it. Send him your mango demands, or demand goes, as I call them. In fact, we should all be using fruit to improve government efficiency as well. Next time you need an expedited passport renewal, wouldn't it be nice to be able to say, 3 weeks is a little too long for me. Let's see if you can speed it up a bit. Yeah, this is a honeydew. That's how angry I am. I've written to you on a garbage melon that only exists to fill out suspiciously cheap edible arrangements. Let's do this thing.
That's what I want.
Communism, all means of production, are owned by the people. Private property does not exist. Goods and services. Communism, from the Latin word communis, common, belonging to all. The goal is to make everybody equal, no social classes. Then command or direct economy. So there'll be no unemployment, but very little economic freedom. I'm holding up my fist right now.
Money don't get everything is true, but what it don't get I can't use.
China, everybody talks about communist China, but it is communist in name only. It's hard to get more capitalistic than China, though there is much government direction, so that is a mixed system. So here's the theory. Everybody starts traditional, then move on to agricultural, and then industrial. That's where we get the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie get richer, the proletariat get poorer, and when they finally won't take it anymore...
As an American, there's a lot that you hear about Cuba, or things that you think you know about Cuba. But to be frank, a lot of that knowledge is very outdated or just plain wrong. First off, we tend to think of Cuba as a little-visited communist dictatorship closed off to the world. And yes, Cuba is a communist dictatorship, but since the collapse of the Soviet Union and Fidel Castro's transferring of power to his brother Raul, things have started to loosen up. Cuba now has a free economic zone, a growing number of privately owned businesses, and is even encouraging limited foreign investment, mainly to support its growing tourism industry. Around 3 million tourists visit Cuba a year, including a number of Americans. The fact is, Cuba is much more open than you may think, and not just economically. The general assumption about communist countries is they have no freedom of religion. Cuba was an atheist nation for a long time, but as of now, around 60% of Cubans are Roman Catholic. Protestants, Jehovah's Witnesses, Methodists, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, and Baha'is are also present and practicing on the island. These groups don't have complete religious freedom, as some government restrictions still apply, but most of them are officially recognized and left primarily alone. We also think of Cuba as being a poor country, and it definitely is. The average person lives on around $6,000 a year, but the country has managed to avoid a lot of the issues that go with poverty. Cuba has good numbers when it comes to health, literacy, infant mortality, and unemployment rates. They have a better infant mortality, literacy, and unemployment rate than Canada, and they beat the US when it comes to overall health. Still, it is widely believed that everyone in Cuba is trying to flee the country for a better life, and that perception does hold on in some parts. 55% of Cubans polled said that they did want to leave Cuba for another nation. So obviously, economic and social issues do weigh heavily on the Cuban people. The top on the list being lack of access. Due to more than 50 years of sanctions, Cuba's resources are very limited. The rumors about all of their cars coming from the 1950s is overstated, but pretty much true. Due to sanctions, new cars don't make it into Cuba often, and in general, Cubans do not have access to a lot of worldly goods, including food. Finally, just to be thorough, we should talk about music, baseball, and cigars. The Buena Vista Social Club does represent one style of music popular in Cuba, but like anywhere else, they have a wide variety of musical interests. At the moment, hip-hop and Cuban-influenced reggaeton are the most popular music on the island. Baseball is big in Cuba, as big as you would think it is. It's actually strongly tied to Cuba's national identity. Cigars, on the other hand, have a less solid position in Cuba. Fidel Castro stopped smoking cigars years ago, and the government has taken a lot of the same steps that other countries have taken to cut down on their smoking population, including limits on smoking in public, the elimination of tobacco-based vending machines, and an effort to stop the sale of tobacco products to children or near schools. Obviously, that's not everything, but it should give you a slightly better picture of what living in Cuba is really like.
If we move on to Russia, was the Soviet Union completely controlled economy, then the collapse, and then it's a kleptocracy, which basically you've got a lot of rich Russian mafia guys who apparently all own houses in London, but that's another story. All right, if you take a look at that oil price and the ruble, they are so tied to oil because that's their number one export. Had something to do with the invasion, kind of invasion of the Ukraine. He's very persuasive. China, widening urban-rural income gap. China is two different countries within one country. You have people living rurally, and you can see that their per capita net income is much, much lower than those people that are living in cities. So you have a developing country within one of the most developed countries in the world. Economic reform for those in the cities, and many of the political reforms in those living out are getting left behind.